All right. Welcome everyone to CornCon Cubed. That's CornCon continuing content because I like big clunky names, don't you? And we are here tonight with the exceedingly talented and award-winning Devin Madson, author of multiple trilogies. But we're going to focus mostly, well, no, we're going to talk about everything tonight. We're going to focus on We Ride the Storm, which is part of the Ruined Empire trilogy, right?
Yeah.
Which I am 65% of the way through. I've been having to take breaks because of all the decapitation. So we're gonna talk about that. So we'll dive right in. That is actually question number one. Devin, why so many heads being removed from so many bodies? Which is only I ask a little bit in jest because, as I said in the follow-up question, is I have a good guess of why you made that choice actually, but I would love to talk about it in the context of world building choices and cultural choices and stuff. So, but yeah, why so many heads in bags?
Yeah, it's become a bit of a thing where everybody calls me like the decapitation lady, or laughs about how many heads I chop off, and it's funny because so few of them are decapitations of live bodies.
Right, that's true.
Like, they're not generally like being executed or any other kind of thing. They're usually dead bodies.
Yeah.
So I've taken to calling it respectful beheading, so that people get the idea that it's we're not doing it in a rude, malicious way. Like the weird thing about this one is that it was a choice that the writing gave me, in that like I don't plan first books really. I haven't in the past. I've started doing so more now. So when I sat down to do We Ride the Storm, I had like a really vague idea based on the fact that I'd done a prequel trilogy. But I didn't have like a plan for what I was going to do. I didn't know who Ra was. I just sat down and I went, I need a really cool first line to start this book. And I was just sitting there going, I really don't know, because I don't know what it's going to be about. But this is a thing I do. I can't start a book without a line. I don't know. It's just a weird thing, one of my quirks. And that one happened to occur to me. It's harder to sever a head than people think. just appeared, and I went, okay, all right. That's a really cool first line. It's now no longer the first line of the book. Sadly, it's now the first line of the second chapter. But it made me go, okay, well, why is that a thing? Because like it's true. It would be hard to sever a head. Cool, but like, why are they doing it? What's the purpose? And so the writing kind of gave me the trigger to consider it as a world building choice, like a cultural choice, of the fact that everybody would have really different death rights. And that it's something that we, I could look at as a way of sort of describing a people's. So yeah, looking at it as the idea of that they do it to release something made sense, because when you stick a blade into a body, it bleeds, right? So the idea that they would consider the soul as being trapped inside a form also works with the particular magic of the world. So yeah, it kind of came entirely from the actual first line. Then I thought about it quite deeply and decided that works really quite well as a form of death right. So it's respectful.
Yeah, no, and that is, I certainly have appreciated actually, like the kind of wonderful juxtaposition of that, like the idea that, because we think of beheading as particularly violent in general, right? Especially, I mean, I think for most people hear it and they think of guillotines, or of I mean, there are various ways to behead people, but that they tend to be, fairly violent. And you talk about respectful beheadings and the fact that that it's framed as a death rite and that it's meant to be sacred. Like this is not something that anyone takes lightly, but it's this rite that's really hugely important to this people, and that they consider very respectful. Like that's really huge. And I particularly like too, I think it's not a spoiler because it comes up in like the first chapter, to talk about the fact that they do it to their own people and enemies, and because all souls are considered equal, and that's a beautiful concept, right? So I kind of love what you've done there. You've got this what's not often considered a barbaric act, and you've attached it to this really noble spiritual mindset, like a really nice. I mean, it's honestly, it's the drive behind it seems very, not, I mean, pleasant is hard to say because it's still cutting off somebody's head, but it's a nice idea, right? Like it's yeah, it's respectful, as you said. Like I think, I don't know how better to phrase it. So anyway, so I have been enjoying that part. It's mainly that every time that it's done to a deceased person, it's just like it's described fairly, not in too much detail, but it is described with some amount of detail. My imagination is very vivid, and so I have been squinting through these descriptions of sawing someone's head off their body after they're dead. No, it's
they get less as you go on.
Oh, that's nice.
Because you get the idea, the first time it's described, the main ideas. So I have to do it less and less. It kind of becomes about the weird quirks of like the fact that you have to like keep your knees apart so you don't get blood all over yourself. Those kinds of like really mundane elements. And like what you were saying about the juxtaposition between it being a kind of spiritual thing and we considering it as a barbaric thing, I was also able to play with that, especially going on more into the second book with the idea of how the Kesians look at this particular act as being barbaric, and that kind of fight between the idea of what is like we might consider something to be barbaric, but to somebody else it's not, and that acceptance of different cultures, I think, is really important and was quite fun to kind of play with and challenge going further on.
Yeah, I'm looking forward. I'm seeing pieces of that already. Like I said, I'm only for those of you watching, I'm 65% of the way through the book and I'm loving it. But I did have to stop and read a fluff read for a bit because the beheading got to be a bit too much. No, it wouldn't normally be, right? But in times of COVID, and I just lost my parents 2 months ago, and I just am like, there's just my tolerance for violence has really lowered. And even though it is a respectful violence, it's still harder for me to stomach than it would be normally, I think. And so I've taken breaks to read like humorous romances.
And then required palate cleansers.
Keep going, yeah. But now I'm down to like just a couple hours left in the book, and I'm sure I'm going to stay up tonight to finish it after we're done talking. But because it's really good, it's driven by such, like, this is another thing, like such effortless and or seemingly effortless world building and intricate cultural descriptions and characterization. Like it's very character driven, which is brilliant. Because it is on an epic scale. And so seeing it happen through the eyes of these three POV characters that we keep switching around with, that like each of their choices are very much driving their portion of the story, with a few exceptions, but it's not like here's this plot that's happening to them whether they like it or not. Those moments happen, but they make these choices that very much drive the story forward, and I think I get a very good feel for each of them. Like it does say the name of the characters at the start of each chapter, but I would absolutely have no trouble following along even if it didn't. The voices are so distinct, which I love, that like you can absolutely tell Cassandra from Ra from Miko, and I love that. That's like, that's what the way you want it. So no idea where I was going with that.
It's funny that you say that you can tell the difference, because actually in the very first, when I very originally self-published the Vengeance trilogy, it's also told in 3 first-person points of view. And we used the symbol, but no name. As kind of like that challenge of forcing me to make sure that the voices were really different, and I don't think I ever had anybody complain that they couldn't tell. I mean, the symbol is there to help as well, so that you get the same symbol.
Yeah.
But it requires that extra kind of, I guess, like work by the reader to kind of go, yes, this is where we are. Yes, this is where we are. So that was good.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I can see that would have worked because it's definitely distinct. So I'm trying to alternate back and forth between like serious writing questions and less serious personal questions. But interestingly, my second question is actually, Devin, why are you so serious? Because you have a video segment on your blog called Serious Author Lady. Or Very Author Lady, or so, yeah, anyway.
Yeah, very serious author lady. And I'm not a very serious person. And I think, that's that's my joke, that I struggle to take things seriously. In a like, I take a lot of, world issues and things very seriously, but in terms of like sort of my own personal presentation of I guess the person and brand that is Devin Madson, it's like I can't be like, yes, I am a very serious pillar of the community. Like I just can't do it. Like, because I know in the same way that everybody else knows about themselves that you're just you. Right. And I feel like being more kind of honestly, authentically just me and all of my silliness is far more valuable to the community, because it shows that we are all just people and we're all on the same level. This idea of putting our heroes on pedestals, they just always keep falling down. So, and that's not great for anybody. It's not great for the person who didn't really generally don't ask to be put on pedestals. Right. It's not great for the community. Yeah. So I figure, like just trying to be as grounded and ridiculous as I would naturally be was the choice of the way to go. It feels more natural to me, and yeah, I think it's just a bit more, and I don't know, it's more fun. The world is a bit awful.
Yeah, we don't really need any more serious right now.
Oh no, we don't. So this is what you see online and whatever. This is just generally me just being very me. I am extremely not a serious human. So
excellent. Well, then we should get along just fine, because I am equally not serious. Although the chances of us digressing into some ridiculous subtopic is high, I think, but oh well. I have really struggled to keep these interviews under the 2-hour mark. My goal is for them to be 90 minutes, and I have failed so miserably at that. Because everybody I talk to is so interesting and so fun, and we just we just get lost in tangents and talk about random stuff, which I think is great, and hopefully people are enjoying. But yes, I have a feeling too that it's like I'm sort of asking people to like sit down for a feature-length film for each of these interviews. And maybe because of COVID, that's fine, but I feel like it's probably reducing our viewership. But oh well, I seem to just be incapable of doing shorter interviews. So.
Watch us on like 2 times speed and listen to us talking like chipmunks. It'll be fine.
There you go. Just like, oh, you have me. Perfect. Good plan. I've heard a bunch of people talking about listening to audiobooks at 2 times speed or 1.5 times speed. And that whole concept freaks me out. I don't know that I would be able to do that personally. Like, it's awesome. I'm so impressed that people can do that, but I mean, first of all, I think it would like seriously detract from the experience for me, because I'm very much about the voice. Like I have a hard time listening to audiobooks in general, because if the narrator is not what doesn't match my mental intonation for an inflection for stuff, then I'm like, I'm out. Yeah. Which is a ridiculous standard, right? Like that's not a reasonable expectation. but that's how my brain works, is like, oh no, you're not reading it the way I would read it, so I'm out of here. And so the idea of like listening to it on 2.5 times speed is like that would definitely not match the cadence. But
yeah, no, I can't do it. I know a few people who do, and like I'm glad they can do super audio processing speed, but I really can't. I struggle to sort of process audio at a normal speed, so I'll just stick with the normal speed.
So your bio describes you as an avid gamer. What are some of your favorite games, and how do they influence your writing, if at all?
Well, I grew up on games. My dad was a computer programmer, so we had computers in the house from back when the screens were black and green. Uh, and he used to program us like ridiculously simple games for like spelling and stuff. So, on those giant floppy disks, the floppy disks that were actually
They're
floppy.
actually floppy, the ones that started the whole
Yeah.
name.
Yeah. I remember those from when I was like 3 years old. Um, so I've always been a gamer. I started with like my mom still reminds me we used to have a game called Captain Comic, and it was just one of those like platformy games, and but the way the keys were positioned meant that my fingers weren't big enough to stretch when I was trying to play them when I was like 3 and 4 years
Aw.
old. I couldn't go from like, I think the like shooting key was like the star on the number pad.
Oh yeah.
And I couldn't reach from there to like I think you
Also
had to
shift.
do it like
Yeah.
with like on the arrow keys and then reach your
Yeah.
little finger over to
Yeah.
shoot, I think was the way like the rest of my family did it, and my little finger wasn't long enough. So so when I say I'm an avid gamer, this is a really long time coming. So I grew up on like LucasArts
Hmm.
games like Monkey Island
Yes.
and
Monkey
yeah,
Island.
I love them so much.
Pitroids?
So I
Pitroids?
didn't actually get a console of any kind until
Hmm.
I was probably like 20.
Oh yeah.
So all of my early gaming memories are all PC games.
Oh.
And then I shifted over into like Fable, Dragon Age. I love Dragon Age Inquisition. It's just I adore it. Weirdly, I haven't played Mass Effect though because I've
Oh.
always been more of a fantasy than a sci-fi person, and I haven't quite pushed myself to like bridge the gap. I prefer to be like stabbing things than shooting stuff with plasma cannons.
That's
So,
fair.
I have a thing against guns. So it's just any game that's like heavy gun usage, I
Yeah.
just can't do. So I love Dragon Age and I love Final Fantasy. So the recent Final Fantasy VII remake was like glorious to my soul. It kept me alive through April and May. So that was
Nice.
that was great. As for how they affect my writing, I'm not sure because I've always just been so immersed in video games. And even more recently, even in tabletop games, that I assume that it's just like encoded in my DNA somewhere. So I think the one thing I can be sure that I've taken from games is especially from like Dragon Age, the idea of writing stories where there is no good answer.
Mm,
Dragon Age is kind of well known for giving you impossible decisions,
mm,
to choose between whether, the mages should be locked up or they should be free. And it's like,
mm,
well, yes, they show you here how dangerous they are, but they also show you how awfully brutalized they can be when they are locked up. And it's like they're essentially asking you a moral question.
mm.
And it's a moral question that because you can't give nuance is
Right.
impossible to answer.
Mm.
And so that idea of constructing narratives to make people go away and question what they would do in any particular situation, I find really quite fascinating. So that one I think has really kind of stuck with me, and the Final Fantasy habit of just doing things because they're cool.
Pretty
I'm
sweet.
here for that.
I think if you like those moral questions, and you also, if you enjoy exploring and stuff, you might enjoy Mass Effect. It raises a lot of those questions, but it not that it lets you give nuance necessarily, but it asks so many questions at different points that I feel like you can sort of create a more nuanced
Okay.
plot line out of the whole thing, because it comes up over and over and over again, and so you basically have multiple chances to choose to be a certain way, and react to people a certain way, and then of course that has long-term effects. But anyway, I don't know, I haven't played it in ages. Like, I haven't played Mass Effect since it first came out, and I only played it for a few weeks, and because it was on, I haven't actually owned my own console since The original SNES.
Whoa.
So yeah. So it's been a long time, but my I used to play on my brother's console and then friends' consoles and yeah. So I think I had like 2 weeks of Mass Effect that I played with a friend. But
Nice.
yeah. But anyway, like that, those questions I do think are really interesting, and that comes up there as well. If you ever feel like, you know,
I will one day.
I mean, there's so many good games. It's hard to say that you actually will. You know, like it's like there's so many other things, and if you know what you like, and it's not, you know, it's not sci-fi with guns, then that's fine. Yeah. So yeah, but I totally I hear you about the green screen and having played games since you were knee high to a grasshopper. That is also also me. The original Civilization that was like super low low intensity graphics. Hmm?
I never played that
Oh,
one. I
really?
played so the ones that they did that were like Caesar, Pharaoh,
Oh, yeah.
Zeus, Emperor, those city building ones. I love
Yeah.
those.
Oh, okay.
And I played the original The Sims.
Oh, yeah.
But I never did Civilization or SimCity really very much.
Oh,
So I
interesting.
was a bit, I prefer the kind of historical ones or
That's
the ones where you
totally
could
fair.
go in pools. Just by removing them, you could just kill them off. They couldn't climb out of the pool. You took the ladder away.
I have never actually played The Sims, because I can't get into to just like playing a game that's everyday life. But but I know so many people who love it, so I'm sure it's actually a fascinating experience. It's just not, I've never been drawn to it. But I used to play SimCity a lot, and I used to play Civilization, but I never actually got into The Sims, and I never got a chance to play. Not got a chance. I never had enough money to buy the really cool Civilization like newer versions. Like basically, a lot of my gaming budget was never really a thing that I set aside, and so I basically have played, aside from World of Warcraft, I have played games that other people have paid for. So I played a lot of Civilization because my brothers bought it, so I just loaded it onto my computer, and I played, you know, but I wasn't living with them anymore once the like Empire ones came out that were really cool, and I didn't, you know, I did not have an extra like $100 to throw at a fancy PC game. So
Yeah, they are pretty expensive.
yeah. And the reason for that also is that I was spending all of my dispensable income that little that I had on books. So
Good escapism there.
yeah. But yeah, but when someone else was paying for games, I played a lot of them. And then I did shell out for World of Warcraft back in the day. And then my computer stopped being able to run it. So until I get a new computer, I can't play anymore. That's coming up soon, though. I'm ordering a new laptop, so soon I'll be able to play again. All right. So we'll go back to slightly more serious questions about writing and your writing life. So I am excited that the thing we have in common is having been SPIFFO finalists. And I think pretty much everyone watching knows what SPIFFO is, because most people found this channel probably through something SPIFFO related. Or if they've been watching long enough from just CoreCon in general, they've seen me talk to a number of SPIFFOers, but self-published fantasy blog off. And I was a finalist in 2019, but Devin was a finalist in 2018 and came in second, basically, with We Ride the Storm, right? And then, huh?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. And then in a super cool twist of fate that is the kind of story that makes people sign up for SPIFFO to begin with, is that although this happened before you were even in SPIFFO, wasn't it? So we can't actually attribute it to that. But
it was like halfway through, so it was
halfway through.
Yeah, I got contacted in January, so it was like after the initial phase and before the finalists.
Okay, cool. So perhaps it was we could maybe it is related to SPIFFO, who knows. I guess you could ask your editor, but maybe they can't talk about it afterwards. So but the question is, because lots of people always wonder, and I've brought this up with some other authors who've gone from indie to trad, talking about the transition. You made a whole video about your transition from indie to trad that's on your website, so everyone should go look at that, devinmadson.com, and go check out that video. But then at the end of that video, you say that you would talk later about the process of writing under contract and how that goes, but which you hadn't done at the time that you filmed that video, but you now have, right? You've now finished 2 more books under contract. So let's talk about that. How does that feel compared to your normal creative process? And yeah, how are you feeling about it?
I don't know, it's really hard to kind of differentiate at the moment, because so normally when I was self-publishing, I would still set myself a deadline. I would be like, this is when I want to have this book done by, this is how many words I'm going to do, this is, whatever. I would let my editor know this is kind of when you can expect stuff, so that she could have it in her schedule, all of those kinds of things. But obviously you always kind of just know that if something goes wrong or different, it doesn't matter. You're the only person that you really need to ask, can I extend my deadline? And it's also, because self-publishing is so much faster, you don't really have to worry about it in terms of like, unless you've got a really tight window, you don't really have to worry about it too much in terms of like pushing the date that you kind of had planned.
Right.
You might not even have announced a date to release it yet, because things move so much faster in self-publishing. Whereas now it's like, so the 3rd book of the Reborn Empire is out middle of next year. And I had to have it in already, middle of this year. So, it's a full 12-month kind of window, which is, perfectly understandable. We have to go through like 4 rounds of edits. It's all, like they have to do the whole production is a whole thing. It perfectly makes sense. But it really kind of changes the way you think about when and how you are producing, because now when I talk about what I'm writing, you guys aren't going to see it for like a year and a half,
right?
Because it's like I'm writing the 4th book right now. The 2nd one hasn't come out yet, so it's this kind of weird separation of the idea of what you're supposed to be talking about versus what you're working on is 2 completely different things. So I find that is a really interesting one. And as for actually kind of having to write knowing that you have a hard deadline, personally, I have found I don't struggle too much with it, because I am a fairly quick producer. I'm very lucky in that I think having done my entire kind of professional writing career with little kids means that I have learned to just write whenever physically possible. So I've learned to do the thing where I go, okay, I have 20 minutes, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write, and I don't have to spend the 20 minutes staring at the page. I've kind of taught myself how to make good use of time, I think, which, now that my kids are kind of getting older, it's not, I don't need to do that as much, but it means that when I have the time, I can sit down and really do it well. So I think the hardest part is actually the layering of deadlines. So especially we had at the end of last year, I was writing, I'd started book 3, and I ended up having to stop working on book 3 at the end of last year, because I had to do the edits for We Ride the Storm. And then so they go through the 4 rounds of edits, and then while that was still going through its 4 rounds of edits, I had to do the edits for the 1st book of the Vengeance trilogy, and then the 2nd book of the Vengeance trilogy, and then the 3rd book of the Vengeance trilogy. So I would have, okay, here's this 3-week window in which I have to do structural edits, but I've also got copy edits for another thing that's got a 2-week deadline, and they would layer on top of each other. So what I find the most difficult is juggling those things, because that's always going to be the case. Well, that was a particularly awful one because I had a trilogy coming out. I think it's always going to be a bit of a problem, because so that's all done now, but right now I have to write the 4th book, I'm currently doing first page passes on the second book and expecting any day to have structural edits on the third book. So it's like this constant juggling of which project is actually the most important, how much time you have to give to each one. All of those kinds of factors I find is actually the hardest part, rather than saying, hey, there's a deadline you have to hit. And I did ask for an extension on the third book, in order to get it. So I got an extra 2 weeks to get the third book in, and they were fine with that. There was no issues with asking. I felt really awful asking, because you feel like, oh no, my editor's going to hate me because I'm such a diva, because I need more time and I can't do it. But they don't think like that. That's just our own internal things, especially also, in the current time, with everything being the way it is. No one's expecting, right, that everybody's going to be entirely on the ball with like their kids being homeschooled and all of that kind of stuff. So totally. I think I think there's definitely challenges to writing under contract, and for some people just having the deadline being there is actually really stressful. So for me, it's like, yay, it's an end point. I can stop working on this book after I hit that date.
Yeah, glorious to actually know when it's got to be done. I find like I work really well with deadlines, so much so that I have to set harder deadlines for myself sometimes, because if it's just a deadline that I set and I'm like, well, but I can move that to whenever, whereas like for my next book, I've already booked an ARC slot in with a galley service, and so if I am not ready by then, and this is one that books up like a year in advance, and so if I'm not ready by then, I miss that slot, and I mean I've only luckily to just book it is only $20, so I won't have wasted a ton of money, but I've already paid for it, and I'm not going to be able to do it for another year, so it's like, nope, has to be ready by then. And so so that's like, having that harder deadline actually helps me get work done usually.
That's good.
But that said, like I worry too about like pushing, like luckily my editor is pretty good about doing quick turnaround stuff, but I feel really bad. I start to feel the guilt building up when I'm like, oh, if I don't do this soon, this is going to be really hard for her. So I gotta get on it. And those midpoints aren't as hard, right? Whereas like, then I assume that because of everything else, it's like, no, your rough draft is due on this day, and then that's whereas like for me, it's just like the final product is now due at this date, but I like the whole thing leading up to that I can squish into as little time as I can, which is not a great.
Each deadline is kind of a hard point. This is the rough draft deadline. This is the structural edit deadline. This is the line edit deadline. And then it keeps going.
That sounds nice, actually, because as a master procrastinator, I would like that's one of my harder things to deal with. So okay, well that sounds really interesting. And the other thing you said you would maybe talk about after you've done it. So you've now had one launch with Orbit, right? And how did that feel compared to your indie launches?
Well, I think that's also made weird by COVID times, that I didn't really get to have what would be kind of traditionally considered to be a debut launch, because we couldn't really do anything, and everything was a bit delayed. So like even people who had pre-ordered the book, a lot of people still got it really late because of the various issues with distribution, and mail services being so clogged up, very understandably. But I think it's kind of weird. I can remember my very early launches as a self-publisher. I started self-publishing in 2013, and I knew nobody at all. I'd always been a super solitary writer. I didn't have a community. I didn't have a writing group. I didn't really have anything. And so when I kind of wanted to celebrate, it's like you ultimately just end up in a room on your own, and it's really depressing. And so I have great sympathy for the people who have attempted to do launches and found themselves essentially just talking to themselves. Even my initial self-published book launch for We Ride the Storm, which I held at a local con, it's like it was really tiny turnout. And you just feel kind of stupid and like that you don't really belong and that your stuff's not good enough. And I told myself after that one, so that would have been in the middle of 2018 when the book came out, that I was never ever going to do this again. You know, it didn't matter what I did and how like popular I looked like I might be. I would never have another like in-person book launch. So I was actually quite glad to be able to completely sidestep the decision on that one by just not being allowed to have an in-person book launch. You know, so that was quite nice. But interestingly, you know, as much as I've always said that, you know, that self-publishing is as legitimate a thing to do as traditional publishing, and that the stigma is total like BS, and we just need to do away with it. You know, it still exists, and so I certainly found that the kind of added legitimacy of having a traditional publisher being the person who's saying this is a book we're releasing, it's awesome, meant that the actual launch process itself was far more, like, it's not really attended because like we're just all on social media, right?
But still, like it
far
got more.
Yeah, that there was more interest in it, and even the bits that like I personally was like instigating and pushing and promoting was still allowed to be like, people took it more seriously because I have a traditional publisher. So, you know, I do feel like we're breaking those self-publishing stigma down, but it's still slow, you know, because you have to prove yourself, you know, and I think I was slowly achieving that, you know, through like just years working at it. You know, I won the Aurealis Award in 2017 or whatever, and then Spitfo, et cetera. You know, you kind of slowly build up a reputation for being actually someone who does produce really good work.
Right.
But I just feel like it takes so long. Whereas, you know, as soon as there's a traditional publisher, it's like you go from 0 to 100 like straight away. It's like, okay, now you are 100% a legitimate author and people will pay attention to you. And like, I hate that. But this process certainly made that fact like extra clear, that, you know, something that I had to have worked at and I could have kept working at would have still taken me years to reach without that added leg up that they're able to give, which is like, kind of depressing. But, you know, I'm really thankful for it because, you know, I do want to have, you know, as solid and strong a career as I can. And it's kind of a bit like the decision that I made when I decided what to do about my author name, because, you know, there is such a kind of prejudice, you know, bias against female fantasy author names. You know, you're assumed that you're writing romance, and as shown by the amount of beheadings in the book, I wasn't writing romance, right? You know, it wasn't meant to be shelved in the YA section. You know, so all of these things, it's like I had to make a decision when I first started out. Okay, am I going to use like my personal, you know, obviously kind of feminine name, or a unisex pseudonym? And it kind of came down to that decision of, do I want to have a career and try and break the boundaries down from that career, or do I want to struggle to even have a career and like have to break the boundaries along the way? And it's like, ultimately I personally made the decision that I would go with have the easier career and use the platform to attempt to break the boundaries than the other way around. So I guess it's kind of a bit the same, you know, like I want to continue to campaign for, you know, self-published books to get more seen and visible, but I'm going to do it from this side of the fence for now, I guess. You know, it's weird. I hate even thinking about it as two different camps. You know, we're all just authors producing. You know, it's more, I feel like we aren't putting ourselves in camps, but people do that in the way they label it. So, you know, if we can break down the wall in there so that people don't even see it as two camps, I think that would be the most excellent, and what this whole process has shown me, which is totally not even the question you asked, but hey.
but it's directly related, and that's great. Because I actually think, yeah, I mean, I think it's important, because Indie Pub has done so much for the publishing industry in terms of breaking barriers for so many people. And so the idea that we can, keep chiseling away at the stigma that Indie Pub suffers for the very fact that it is so open and welcoming to everybody, right? Like anybody can publish via Amazon or any other platform. Like anybody can digitally publish anything, and even print wise now. I mean, like PubPod has blown everything open. Like you can just have your books out there to order. Much harder to actually get in bookstores, but that's a whole separate well, actually not a whole separate issue. That is one piece of the many layered issues.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so I mean I can appreciate that. It's like, I have to say sometimes when an indie pub goes trad, I'm sort of like, yay, now you can, champion the fact that your writing was already quality, right? Like, I think it just makes more of that case, right? And especially in your case, I feel like you sold 7 books in one shot, right? Like, that's a ridiculous deal. Like, I don't know how many people know that, but that kind of sale. I mean, 3 of them were already fully published. 4 of them were already fully published, right? So yeah. So 3, like the Vengeance trilogy and We Read the Storm, are already fully indie and out. And Orbit comes along, and after just like vaguely getting in touch with you, then eventually is like, and here's the offer for 7 books, which is just.
Agent told me it was very bizarre.
That's amazing. But that also is a really clear sign that you were already writing really quality books, right? Like they bought all the stuff you'd already written, with the exception of novellas.
Yeah.
Right? They bought all your full-length novels. And and then they're like, and plus, the rest of this series. And it's like, holy crap, that's amazing. And it's a very obvious sign that you were already amazing. Orbit has not made you amazing. You were already amazing, right? They hopefully have helped you make the books even better, because that's
yeah. I was gonna say, it's something I struggle with, because I have that feeling of, like, oh yay, it's a real book now. That feeling of when I walk into the bookstore, I have that thought, that initial thought of like, look, it's a real book, it's in a bookshelf. And then I have to actually tell myself that is like this cemented bias that comes in from this idea that it wasn't a real book before.
Right.
And then I get really angry at myself for being like, but no, it was a real book before. Yes, you were a real author before. There is no like sudden actual real tick mark of being like yeah, I am further along the legitimacy line of proving myself, because it's sitting there on the shelf, and people walking by are going to go, hey, look at that. But ultimately it doesn't actually change how good the book was before, how I was writing before, or anything else. And it's sadly something that even I have to catch myself on and be like, no, that's just like this whole industry bias that you are carrying with you, that we all carry with us, this idea of like that we haven't made it until somebody tells us that we have. Right. And as much as it's nice when someone tells you that something's good, I mean, it actually makes no difference. It's kind of like how you get positive reviews, and they don't suddenly make you like confident for the rest of your life.
For like 5 minutes. It lasts about 5 minutes.
Right? It doesn't last. And so this is why I stopped reading reviews, because it's not even just that the negative ones outweigh the positive ones, because we tend to lean more into remembering the negative comments. But it's also just that idea that I didn't want to like attach my sense of my workability to anybody else's opinion. Right. And it's so easy to kind of just connect your sense of self-worth to positive reviews or negative reviews, or just reviews. And I really just wanted to completely separate this idea that I was even writing for anybody other than myself, if that makes sense. Like I just wanted to kind of So I don't read any reviews. So, you know, I appreciate reviews highly, but I try to steer clear of reading them completely. And yeah, and I feel like it's a bit the same, you know, you have to kind of constantly pull yourself back and be like, no, you are already excellent, you know, and having someone tell you so is not going to work.
Right. Yeah. It never really sticks.
No,
You'll be
so
crippled
yeah.
with self-doubt in the next new project every time, no matter what.
Right, and I would tell you now that you know, I know a lot of traditionally published authors and, you know, ones who went straight to traditional publishing, not through self-publishing. We are all crippled with self-doubt. We just are really good at pretending that we know what we're doing.
That's
You know,
right.
in the private spaces behind the scenes, we're all just like screaming and crying. Okay, so just that
Constantly.
is just the way it works.
That is the life of a creative. Just spend all your time screaming into the void or crying or both. Yeah.
Yeah,
And assuming and staring at a computer screen or whatever and going, I don't know how to do this. Why did I think I knew how to do this? I've never known how to do this.
yep, pretty much every single time.
Yep. Yeah, it seems to be pretty ubiquitous, and everyone that I've talked to so far in this interview series has said something similar, regardless of how well they're selling, by whom, you know, like other fully trad authors who've never ever gone indie feel the same way. Indies who are selling loads feel the same way. Indies who are selling nothing feel the
Yeah.
same way. Like everybody does it. Yeah. So, but well, whatever. We just keep telling stories because otherwise we go mad, and there you go. At least that's why I do it. So all right, let's talk about okay, a little bit of very interesting news, and apropos to tonight's earlier festivities. Worldcon 2025.
Yeah. This is the thing that we're
This is a
doing.
thing.
Yep.
You and one other person are apparently co-chairing a bid for
Yep.
dun 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 dun, dun
Yep.
drum roll,
So,
please fill in.
yeah. Okay. So, my co-chair for this, so this is a Worldcon bid for 2025 for Brisbane in Australia. My co-chair is Leaf Shawcross, who is another author. She does fairy tale retellings, and she's brilliant and amazing, and has run one of our local cons for quite a long time. So that's really great. So this actually, it's one of those things that we had. There was a bid originally for Perth. For this particular year that had kind of already been floated and ultimately ended up canceling. And we have, I think, at least one of the members of that on board already for this one. We're kind of passing the torch over, as it were, to a team that's feeling more placed and enthusiastic to do it. So it's one of those things that, like, you know, it only really comes to the side of the world kind of like every decade. We had Worldcon in 2010. That was the first Worldcon I ever went to because it was in Melbourne where I lived.
Nice.
I didn't even know what it was at the time. Really, like I knew it, like I found out, like, I don't know, the weekend before that it was on, that I could go, and I had I don't know, she would have been like a 9-month-old baby.
Oh, nice.
So I ended up going down for the day just to check it out, and just being awed by how amazing it was, having all of these people who love the same thing I do being all gathered in a space. And, you know, this is 3 years before I self-published anything. And then, so, you know, when it was coming to New Zealand in 2020, we're like, sweet, that's 10 years, you know, that's kind of our rotation on how to travel to the other side of the world. Cool, that's great. Yeah, and, you know, so COVID being COVID, obviously
no one actually had to travel to the other side of the world.
That's right. And
Yeah.
we are all like, so not only did people not have to travel to us, and therefore aren't in that position of being not wanting to do it again for a while,
Right.
but also we were entirely robbed of our ability to meet up in person. And because of the tininess of both of our countries, like Australia has less population than New York City. So we're a big space with not all that many people in it.
Yeah.
And which means that actually meeting up is quite difficult, it's quite far to places,
Yeah.
like to go Melbourne to Sydney. If I want to go and visit my best friend and ex-editor in Sydney, it's an 8.5 hour drive.
Right.
For me to go and visit her. It's 2 hours for drive for me to go and see my parents. It's like it's just everything is far here.
Yeah.
And because we have such a small community, it also means that like when we get together, it's often smaller groups. We can really only run one, maybe two national kind of conventions. So like I've programmed for Continuum, which is the Melbourne-based con. They also have one in Canberra and one over in Perth. But we're all struggling for people,
Right.
because our communities aren't large enough for the
Yeah.
organizational aspect of it, as well as for the attendance aspect of it.
Right.
They're just like, there isn't even a big enough community in Sydney, which is like the biggest city in Australia. They don't even have a con. They don't
Right.
have one. And it's just like mind-blowing, right? So the idea that we were going to get to all just, hop over the water and go to New Zealand and actually get to be in a space with our peers and our people and fans and be able to like exist in that space was so glorious for us, that when it got canceled, like I know a number of people who were planning on going who couldn't even jump on the virtual thing because they were just too depressed by this idea that they had been totally, and especially if it was going to be their first Worldcon. For a lot of people who are, have come into the fandom in the last 10 years, it would have been their first Worldcon.
Yeah.
And something about being in the physical space is just so different, and getting to meet people. And it's just so glorious. So we're just like, no, this isn't okay. Like Con Zealand have done, getting their stuff online, like must have been the most
so hard
work, and good on them for being able to pivot and even attempt something like that. That's great. But what were we going to wait another 10 years to have it come back here?
No.
Like, no, we'll have been 20 years between World Cons, and it's just like, please no. I think there's an isolation to living in Australia and being part of something that is, like so US UK centric, because the distance it takes. Like I went to the Dublin Worldcon, and it was a 24-hour flight there, and it was a 24-hour flight back. I was only able to be away from my son for a certain amount of time, so I literally flew in the night before and flew out at the end of the final day. I didn't do anything. I didn't see any of Dublin. I didn't see any of Ireland. I didn't do anything. It was just like, because of the flights, the jet lag. It's just like, but that's the price that we have to pay to be a physical member of the community. And so I really feel for all the people who struggle to get to Worldcon or to be included in Worldcon, because it's called Worldcon, but as people often joke, it's often just kind of US con. The amount of times, and I understand why that's the case, but while we have like a far more globalizing world, trying to move it away from the US more often, I feel, is something worth striving for. Anyway, so we just suddenly had this really enthusiastic group who were just like, but we could do it, like this, we would want to do this and this, and suddenly we were just like, well, why are we just talking about it? Why don't we just do this? And like I've never actually chaired a con, so Leaf has. I've programmed a national convention, but we have a team of very knowledgeable people behind us. And the thing with being a chair is it's like, well, you make lots of final decisions and ultimately you're leading things, but more than anything, it's not you that has to do, like, you're not doing like all the work. You are the face of a con, of a bid to try to achieve something. And I thought, well, that is something I can do. We can manage to do this, and to try to encourage people to come back and do like a a super diverse convention where we can make it truly a world con rather than trying to ending up with white con or whatever.
Yeah.
I really, we feel so strongly passionate about this idea that we just went, nah, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. We will pick a city in Australia that is not too expensive to be in, that's pleasant to be in, has enough space. Like we couldn't put it in Sydney because it's too expensive for people. And we wanted to keep those kinds of considerations in mind. It's not only more expensive for people, it's more expensive for us. And so, we really wanted to try to consider all the ways in which we could make it accessible and give it to the world. We're even considering like running a parallel virtual stream for all the people who can't make it to Australia because we are far away and it is expensive to fly, and we don't want to cut people who haven't got the funds out of the ability to attend in some meaningful fashion, and keep the cost of that down as much as we can. So anyway, awesome. I could go on about this because we're super passionate about it, but yeah, we are totally bidding for the 2025 Worldcon to be in Brisbane. And yeah, we're excited.
That's awesome. That's really great to hear. I'm all for it. It would of course be insanely expensive for me to go, but I would try. And and I love the idea that you would try to include a virtual piece as well, because while as you say, like there's nothing that replaces being there physically, but for so many people it is so hard to manage. And as someone who has organized an online convention, I think it's a worthwhile thing to do. And I certainly we've gotten a lot of positive feedback from people about how included they felt in the con season, for being able to do that and do an online version. And so that sounds really awesome. You absolutely have my vote. Not that I'm actually a voting member of SAFA, so it does not actually matter. But
it will be voted on in 2023, which depending on where it goes, will either be in China or Memphis. So if you go to Memphis, should that be a thing? But you are actually, and I think before, so I think if you're also a member of the Chicago one in 2022, you are allowed to vote as well.
All right. So, well, I'll see if I can, punch through high enough to qualify for SFWA. I actually have I'm potentially working on it.
Oh, you don't have to be a member of the SFWA to vote. It's
really?
You just have to have gone.
You just have to be there.
Yeah, you just have to.
Okay. Cool. Well, I can probably make it to ChicagoCon as long as COVID's done. Yeah. I can do that.
Oh, right. I mean, obviously, everything is extremely dependent on COVID being. That's a depressing topic to segue into. Let's move on.
Sorry, we'll skip that. So let's talk about plants instead, because COVID is misery-inducing, but plants actually really help with defeating COVID. Not actually the disease, but the mental fatigue of living in a COVID world. Yeah. So let's talk about the benefits of plant witchery. You describe yourself as a plant witch, which I love. I am very much into gardening as well. So let's talk. What were your benefits of plant witchery?
I love the physicality of plants and gardening. That it's a thing I can do that involves like the whole body as opposed to writing, which just involves tapping my fingers on a keyboard. So I love that aspect of it, the getting outside. But I also love, so indoor plants have become kind of my thing recently, where I just want to have as much greenery in my house as I physically can. So I just keep adding to the number of plants. But my problem is that I'm kind of my energy levels fluctuate in like depending on what I'm focused on. So I'm a fairly high energy human, but I focus really obsessively on certain things for a space of time. And if I don't finish achieving a goal in the time where I am focused on it, it might not happen, or it will just get neglected. So the amount of plants I have killed is quite high. Just through neglect And I recently discovered that because we put in a central heating system before the winter, because it's winter here right now, and because it comes through ceiling vents, it's drying out all of my hanging plants before I even notice that they're So you might water normally, maybe like once a week or something. I'm having to water like every day because they're drying out. Some of the ones that are higher up, right? So it's like these challenges that I was not expecting. But so I've done the same with outside. So we live on 20 acres of bushland, and the space around the house is fairly cleared. So I've put in a couple of orchards. I've got like lots of apple trees and nectarines and things like that. But we also have a lot of wildlife. So they tend to, like, wallabies are terrible. It's so cute, but terrible. They thump everything and tear everything off, and they will eat even the tree bark. They like the little leaves and everything, but they will gnaw all the way up the trees, so that they're really stripping them. So I have to build a lot of like protective fences and stuff. And then I get halfway through that job and do something else, and then the trees get eaten. I have lost so many avocado trees. I have tried so many times, and even when I feel like I've fenced it in beautifully, somehow a week will go by and there's just the stick that used to be an avocado tree. It is so depressing.
Oh man.
So I feel like for me, plant witchery is actually a bit of a war, with myself as much as with like the climate and the wildlife, because obviously Australia also doesn't get an awful lot of rainfall. So I'm also kind of fighting with the dry. And here we get, because I live in the southern part, so we get quite a bit of frost in the winter, which a lot of plants don't really like very much. So yeah, I like it. I like it for that it's actually kind of challenging as well as soothing. So it's a bit of a weird thing for me. I love it. And yeah, that physicality and the greenery and the sense of being able to like grow something real, like make something that's very like alive, that also doesn't talk back like your children does. It's but yeah, it's also, I kind of like the fact as well that it's a challenge, and that it's actually, I've always been one of those people who was naturally kind of good at enough stuff that I got angry at things that I wasn't naturally good at, that I actually had to work at. So I was naturally perfectly able to do math. Math never bothered me. Like I was always quite good at writing and spelling, and I read really young. So in my early years, I was like, oh look, she's good at everything. And then so I started getting angry at all the stuff that I wasn't, like when I first tried to play the piano and failed miserably, and threw tantrums at my mother because of how bad it was. When I couldn't ride my bike the first time, I'm also just really impatient. So it's the first thing I've really found that I love enough that even though I'm really, really bad at it, I really want to keep trying. And that really means something to me, in that, it's just, I don't know, it's fun, it's glorious, it's a challenge.
Nice, that's great. Houseplants are actually a level of difficulty too high for me. I absolutely do not recognize anything that is inside and doesn't make noise as alive. And so the houseplants we have, and we have a few of them, but they're entirely my husband's doing. Like, I cannot keep a houseplant alive to save my life, except orchids, because apparently an orchid is like, do not water me. If you water me, I will just die to spite you. Stop that. And so like I will forget that an orchid exists, except like once every 6 weeks, and then pour a little bit of water on it, and it's like, thank you, that's perfect. But meanwhile everyone else is like, orchids are the hardest plants, how can you possibly do orchids when you can't do anything else? I'm like, it's because they don't actually want you to water them. They hate you. They don't want you to touch them or water them or look at them or breathe on them. And I'm really good at ignoring houseplants. So orchids and I get along quite well. But I love outdoor vegetables. I also ignore flowers. Like if it's not going to feed me, it does not register in my brain. And so, but I will grow, I'm growing right now, I'm growing tomatoes and corn and kale and Swiss chard and peas and carrots and some pumpkins. and I'm growing all of that, and peppers, and I love doing that, and I love getting out there and taking care of those plants. But I am so terrible about taking care of anything decorative. I just really, it's like astonishingly bad at it. And like
Love it.
to the extent that my husband and I used to fight about it, because he would say, he would just get mad at me. Like he would leave to go on some trip or something, and he would be like, "Can you water the houseplants?" And I was like, "I can try." Like, but I'm not gonna remember. Like if you told me like right as you're walking out the door, I could do it while you tell me, but that's not helpful because you just watered them. You need me to water them a week from now, and that's not gonna happen.
You
And
need like a
and he really thought that I was like doing it on purpose, that I was like letting his houseplants die to spite him. And I'm like, no, I just absolutely don't remember that they exist ever. Like I have ADHD
like
and it just
forever.
doesn't, they're not there. They're not part of my brain. Anyway, it provides now just entertainment, because he has finally recognized that this is just a facet of my personality and it's not actually malicious. And so when we,
That's good.
like, yeah. And so sometimes even if he's the only one leaving, he'll be like, "Do I need to call someone to water the house plants?" I was like, "Well, you could text me." Like, but the
Yeah,
problem
text
is,
reminder.
yeah, but the problem is even then, like it has to, only if I get the text while I'm not doing anything else, will I actually be able to go and do it. Because if I get it and I'm in the middle of something, I will 100% forget that I got it.
Yeah,
Anyway.
that's tough.
Yeah, my brain is a trap basically, but not like a still trap for memory, but just a trap for me as a human living a life. But but because like weirdly, because plants that give food are a thing that I get really excited about, I remember them. And so although I sometimes still forget to water them, and then I feel bad and go out and apologize
Yeah.
and water them. Anyway, on that note, let's talk about being a dual wielding rogue. um, because
Excellent.
because you have also mentioned in your bio that that you are a dual wielding rogue who always completes every side quest and thus is way too hardcore for the final boss, which is awesome. But you never specify which weapons you're wielding. So I would like to know, please tell me which weapons are you dual wielding?
Yeah, anything that stabs, usually. I'm a very stabby human. See, this is the way I play my video games. You know, like I really love, I have a lot of respect for people who can sneak around in games. I have tried playing numerous like Assassin's Creed games, for instance,
Yeah.
because I love the idea of it. But as soon as it's one of those missions where you can't be seen and you have to sneak around, I have like panic attacks playing these games. They're just too intense for me. I can't do it. And so pretty much as soon as there's a game that's like, okay, you've got to, you know, most dual wielding kind of things often come with the fact that like you're not as strong, you know, that you've kind of got to dance around a bit and flip around and make sure you don't get hit. And I'm just like, nope, that's too stressful for me. I just want to be right up in their face and stabbing people. So so this is another reason I really love like Dragon Age, because you can set the difficulty. So I can be like, all right, I want to play this game, but I don't want to play it the way that you're telling me I have to play it. So I'm going to drop the difficulty so that I don't have to worry about what anybody else is doing. I can just rush in and stab them in the face. And you know, I don't want to go down the traditional, I have a tank, I have a healer kind of path. You know, I just don't bother. I'm just like, no, I am a one person stabbing machine and I just want to do that. So yeah, that's pretty much if I have to do anything from a distance. I love archery a lot. But it's just not like in your face and visceral enough for my gaming experience. So I tend to go, if I have to, I'll do that. But I just, it's always just, someone with two blades, however slashy and stabby I can possibly be, I will do. Yeah. Sorry, very
That's
bloodthirsty.
fabulous. I actually, yeah, I'm a big fan of playing like solo World of Warcraft because it's too intense to do a bunch of raids and stuff unless I'm doing them with actual people I know.
Yeah.
And so like playing with other humans that I'm familiar with is fun. But if the option is like play by yourself or wait to log in with a group of total random strangers and then try to do your one little slotted job in the midst of a dungeon and possibly be responsible for getting everybody killed, I would much rather do all the side quests and go get too high level and go back and do the lower level dungeons and be able to solo them all and be like, ha ha ha, and just like, destroy everybody. Even though that's, like not for a lot of people, that's not fun. But for me, I'm like, no, this is great because I got to do it by myself and I didn't need anybody's help. And I still got,
I totally agree.
Because it's low key. And I play games to relax.
Well, not everybody plays games for a challenge, and I get that a lot of people like to play games because it's part of their challenge. But for me, I get my challenge and plant witchery and writing, parenting, the world, whatever. When I come to gaming, it's like, well, I don't want another thing that's like prove how good you are at something. I want something that is like, here is this fantasy experience. How do you want to have fun in it and feel like part of it and to do things the way you want to do? So I don't want a challenge. I don't want a tiny pigeonhole job. I want to just be able to do whatever I feel like. Yes, normally that is just like stabbing people in the face. But whatever it is, it's like you can do, and you don't have the game telling you're not good enough for that or whatever.
Yeah. No, I get you. That's totally how I feel. It's also how I feel about skiing. Like I grew up skiing and I have a bunch of friends who are like way better skiers than I, or even some that are like just as good, but they're way more into like super intense, like, when I was in my teens and 20s, I would do black diamonds occasionally, double diamond once in a long while, but mostly I just wanted to like cruise down like, blue, which are like the intermediate, like I just want to chill. I don't want to like be like, oh god, I'm about to die. I'm like, oh no, this is I'm having fun, like.
I have never been skiing.
Okay.
Ever.
That's fair. From what I hear, it's, like or what I should say is from all the skiers that I met in Japan, I've heard there's not a lot of skiing in Australia because the majority of the skiers I met in Japan were from Australia.
No.
But anyway, but it's just the same concept. It's like if I'm doing this thing to relax, I don't want to like the intense near-death experience or pseudo near-death experience. I want to chill. All right. In addition to that, about your dual-wielding rogue, if your dual-wielding rogue were to be an animal, what would it be and why?
I think I would probably have to go with something like a dog because I have like kind of two aspects to my personality. I have the, like happy, be my friend. I'm so happy and nice and cheerful all the time. And I am totally just stab you in the face and rip your throat out with my teeth kind of aspects of me. So I feel like something like that. I'm not disdainful like a cat, or always, lying down like a sloth. I'm very energetic. And then, so I feel like something like that probably is the most accurate to me personally, where, most of the time I'm all cheery and then you push me the wrong way and I'm just going to bite your face. So
fair enough. Probably a wolf,
not your face.
Really, then
yeah. Any kind of animal that is has those two aspects, I think would totally be very me.
Fair enough.
Not to bite your face.
I'm just trying to picture like a stabby wolf. I'm like, because of course, like the cats actually have claws that can be a bit stabby. Wolves don't. Just the front, just the teeth. But going for the jugular, like that works.
Yeah.
Just thinking of all the ways to kill someone as an animal. Just, I don't know, it's something that I contemplate often for fantasy stories. I don't know how much it comes up in your world. Although I do hate the wolves being vicious trope. Sorry, this is completely apropos of nothing except a Netflix trailer I was watching last night. That, and you see it. I've seen it so often in the last few years in fantasy movies or whatever, just about, wolves being really vicious, and it's like, that is absolutely not what wolves are, which is why I brought up wolf as an example. Like, wolves are 90% of the time happy-go-lucky, sweetest things in the world, and then 10% of the time I will effing kill you.
Perfect for me.
Yeah. And yet it's like, and wolves get a bad rap because people are like, oh yeah, this wolf would totally attack you. It would not. It would leave you alone and want to go play with
I mean, it is pretty ubiquitous in fantasy stuff. I mean, even kind of thinking back to like Beauty and the Beast, like the original Disney Beauty and the Beast. It's like, as soon as you need a dangerous scene in a forest, it's like, oh, wolves are coming to attack us.
And they're like, no.
I mean, they did it as well. It's like, we're just going through the forest. Oops, there's wolves. They're coming for us. It's like, okay, I think it was done much better, even just in mentions in like Jen Williams' Winnowing Flame series. Mentions the fact that there is a lot of like wolves in like this old rundown city that are just around, and I don't think they really have too much of a run-in. I think they have one run-in with them at one point, but there is so much kind of world building gone into the idea of how little there is for them to eat around because of what's happened to the area, that it's like you get that sense of like lone desperation.
Yeah.
Right. And because she did that build up, it doesn't feel like the same kind of tropey thing that it was, wolves.
Yeah, right. Like, no, that wolf is like 20 miles that way because he could smell you and had no interest in hanging out with you. Like, that wolf isn't anywhere nearby. But yeah, a super starving wolf would absolutely, well, not absolutely. It still might avoid you because it might consider you too much of a threat. Wolves generally consider humans a threat. But if it were like extra desperate, maybe also a little bit sick, it might attack, but then it would also not be a super intimidating wolf. Anyway, sorry. I've worked in wolf rescue and it's a pet peeve of mine. I'm like, no, like the stigma needs to die. Wolves are not the animals. Like, a mountain lion would absolutely mess you up with no provocation. Mountain lions love to like stalk humans because they're like, oh, you think you're smart? No. You have come into
people are scared of slaying animals. You guys have these. We don't have big predators. Like, we just don't have them. So that's losing a lot.
Yeah.
We don't have bears. We don't have mountain lions.
Yeah. No, instead you have a bajillion really small animals that can kill you without you even noticing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have the sneaky ones.
Yes. Got all kinds of really venomous snakes and spiders and all kinds of good stuff. Even your marsupials are venomous. Like, come on. Platypus with fur and
platypus.
Yeah. Do echidnas have little anything venomous?
No. Echidnas are soft little fuzzballs. Spiky
fuzzballs. Australian hedgehogs, obviously. So okay, well, fair enough. So you'd be a wolf. You'd be happy-go-lucky, and then you would be occasionally very violent. Back to books then for a little bit. All three of the Vengeance trilogy are dropping August 4th. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
All three at once.
Yeah, that's like in 3 days from me or something.
That is really soon. So soon. It terrifies me how soon that is because it should not be August yet. And yet also it seems like time is passing so slowly and also so quickly. And
it's just
but August is just right there, and then you got 3 new books. Well, not new, 3 revised books coming out. How do we want to, are there many changes, by the way?
Yeah, so I mean, the first and the third, not so much. So these books are on average much shorter than We Ride the Storm. So I think the revised version of Blood of Whispers came in more at like 115,000. So they're kind of a little bit on the shorter side, but I rewrote substantial parts of the first one, not in terms of like the way the story goes, just some of the scenes were like added to, kind of changed around, reframed a little bit. So, I probably rewrote about, I don't know, 25 to 30%, like sort of wholesale, as opposed to just everything. Obviously, everything got a general edit and fixing it, but like scenes that I actually removed and entirely added. That's probably the amount. It's more like 75% for the second book.
Oh wow.
The second book had always been my weakest book that I'd ever put out. And I'd known that for a long time, but it's one of those things, I think, when you're self-publishing, it's like, well, I think maybe when you're anything publishing, really, you don't really have like, where's the point in going back and fixing a book that's like already out and kind of already decided upon? I feel like you have to have a really good reason to go back and make changes that are substantial to something rather than continuously kind of moving forwards with like a front list. So I've known that it was kind of my weakest book and not really had any particular plans to do anything about it anytime soon because it just seemed pointless. So I was really glad actually to be offered the opportunity to go back and to fix that.
That's cool.
And weirdly, despite the fact that I rewrote so much of that book, the third book I barely changed at all, because ultimately the second book still finished in the same place. So while some of the characters took a slightly different journey to get there. I mean, one character in particular, I completely rewrote her arc. That's Hannah, for those who have read We Ride the Storms. She was one of the point of view characters. So I completely rewrote her second book arc. But ultimately, yeah, because she ends in the same place, they all end in the same place. So the third book, I did barely anything to, like just a couple of things that I had to fix up based on the changes that I'd made. But ultimately, I didn't really. But then the first two I brought out in 2013. And the third one didn't come out until 2016. So I think there was also, that kind of 3 years difference of being like how able I was to write a good book. I think you could see the difference in my personal ability level between the second and the third books. So yeah, I was really happy to be able to go back and fix it all up because it is ultimately a story that connects really quite strongly to the Reborn Empire series because it happens like 17 years before. It's in a lot of the same locations. There are a couple of carryover characters. They're none of our point of view characters, but like I said, so Empress Hannah in the Reborn Empire, we get to see her story. Emperor Qin, obviously, we get to see sort of like their whole thing and the reason why they are the way they are. Which is I think once you've read We Are the Storm is quite interesting to kind of go back and look at, well, how did we end up at this point, which was ultimately why I wanted to rewrite the Storm, because so I wrote this story and ultimately the place at which I leave the third book of the trilogy is like, you have closure, but you have this sense of this could go two different ways. Like it really depends on people involved, how they choose to kind of move forwards. And how, like that idea, I guess, of like forgiving versus not forgiving and all those sorts of decisions that we make, and ultimately the flow-on effect that those kinds of things can have if you happen to also be in a position of power. So, like while for most of us deciding, not to forgive somebody or to forgive somebody really doesn't have all that much weight to the wider world, it's mostly to our own experience around us. When you are an emperor of a thing and you end up making your choices because you don't have all the same kind of checks and balances, when you're making decisions based in like hate, you're going to be making very, very different decisions. So it was a really, that was ultimately the whole kind of reason that I came to Rewrite the Storm in the first place, because I wanted to kind of tell the story of what happened, you know, like where they went, and the effects that it had on the empire as a whole. So I feel a lot of people are going to be quite interested to go back and see what happened to lead us to this point in the first place.
Yeah.
So to be able to have the opportunity of being not just like, okay, here are some books that I wrote like years ago, they're really not as good. People had the opportunity to be like, okay, but now I've gone over them all, and obviously, you know, they are different. They're more heavily magical than Rewrite the Storm is. They're a little bit narrower in scope, and that we're a civil war instead of you know, conquest. You know, the characters are all, you know, it is different. It is still structured on something that I wrote, you know, initially in my career. So, you know, I like everything that I write, but you know, there's a chance that it's kind of like they might not be as tight as Rewrite the Storm. I really don't know, because I can't look at it objectively. But ultimately, I feel so proud of the fact that I was able to go back and create something that I was now no longer like, I used to sell them at cons and be like, I hope you don't hate them. And now I'm at least proud of the fact that like I have been able to rework them and be like, I'm really proud of these. These are great now. You know, whether people, I feel like everybody would have a difference on whether they prefer Rewrite the Storm or the original ones based on completely different things, whether they like the higher magic, tighter, narrower focus, or the more kind of like emotional jousting that kind of happens in those stories versus the more physical kind of stuff that we get in Rewrite the Storm. So, you know, it's all very, I think it's a different kind of feel and a different story. But yeah, ultimately still connects in really well. And I was very glad to be able to rewrite them so much.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's actually, that's really cool, because there is a point. I mean, like when you're indie, you can theoretically rewrite something whenever you feel like it, but there's also a degree to which that way lies madness, right? Like because you can endlessly tinker and just never move forward onto a new book, you know, like there's and so there's a certain point where it feels like, especially with a certain point of like when a certain number of copies are out in the world, you're like, okay, well now it seems sort of dishonest to go back and change it.
I struggled with that.
You struggled, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I struggled a little bit with that idea with this, because you know, ultimately the same like Amazon page and the same Goodreads page and everything is still there, and it's the same world and the same story still takes place. And I did have fans who picked me up really early on and kind of read through, you know, and then fans who, when Rewrite the Storm came out, decided to read the previous trilogy first and then we'd Rewrite the Storm, so that they could get a full, you know, kind of
the chronological
story. And so now it feels really weird to have been like, I was so glad to go and do this, because I didn't think they were kind of indicative of where I'm at now. You know, if I hadn't done anything with them.
Right.
So I'm so glad I was able to, but ultimately now kind of looking at it and being like, it does feel weird. It feels weirdly like I sneakily changed something while you guys weren't looking. And it's okay if that's like a couple of typos or something, but I rewrote like 75% of a book
too, yeah.
You know, and so now like none of the reviews are even gonna make sense. Do you know, like anything that's already there for the story, it's like you're gonna go, what, that doesn't happen. What? Because they don't doesn't happen anymore,
right?
So so it's a bit weird, and I don't really know how to feel about it much, because I mean they are,
I would say feel fine.
Nobody so I'm just kind of like, it's new territory for me, you know. Like the changes in Storm were enough to kind of feel a little bit weird about, and that, you know, I added a couple of extra chapters and changed a few things, but ultimately it was enough the same that I didn't feel too strange about it when and you know, and enough people just accepted that there were going to be changes and said what kind of has changed, and I was able to just be sort of open about it. This time feels just really bizarre, because it's like, what has changed everything.
Spoiler. I can tell you, but then you shouldn't read the book anymore. Like, that's
Yeah. So I'm kind of waiting to see how I'll feel kind of post release of this particular set.
That's got to be an interesting feeling. But at the same time, I don't think you should feel at all bad about it, because you didn't just go back and decide to do it on your own, like, I'm just going to go back and change all this. But you know, like, sold 7 books to a major publisher, and one of the things they wanted to do was make some major revisions to book 2. So you're like, okay, you know, and that's also, as you say, it's like it's a good feeling to feel like you're bringing your work up to the level of where you are now. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. I mean, like, I'm working on book 3 in my current series of the Gensokai books. And I have, like, so I went back and reread books 1 and 2 just to remind myself, because it had been years, because I'd been working on a separate series for a while. So coming back to this and reminding myself of everything. And when I reread Blade's Edge, which was a SPIFBO finalist, I was like, oh, how did this make the finals? And it's not bad. It's not bad. But there were so many scenes where I was like, oh God, I want to rewrite it. I want to rewrite it and make it better. You know, and I don't want to do that, because now, you know, like, Blade's Edge is the only book of mine that has sold thousands of copies. And so I'm like, that feels weird. You know, there are a lot of people who have read it who they would be changing the experience on them. And so I'm gonna just, and you know, also it was good enough to become a SPIFBO finalist, even though it's kind of makes me cringe. So part of me is like, I should just leave it. And it's like, it was my debut. Right? What are you gonna do? Right? If it had been trad published, there would be no choice about changing it. So just like leave it there, and it's fine. And then I was greatly reassured that reading the second book did not make me feel that way. But yeah, it was like, oh, nice. And it was written, well, yeah, like the final, like it was written 3 years later. And so there was that shift in skill, and I feel like, and now if I would, you know, my hope is that my writing has improved yet again, like after writing a whole other series and coming back. But this 3rd book hopefully will be a mark above the others. Don't actually know that, but that's the hope, right? But I think
until you move on and come back and read it.
Yeah. But I think that's a good thing ultimately, right? Like, we want to be improving as writers, and there's a certain degree to which you can't just keep going back and changing everything. If you get a chance to, it's kind of nice. But but it's also, you know, it's not bad to have, you know, your body of work was like, yeah, this is where I started and here's where I am now, and those are different places. I know, like,
and it doesn't take away from like the greatness of the body of work as a whole. I mean, I get that a lot when people talk about Terry Pratchett books, right?
Yeah.
Like nobody decides that actually Terry Pratchett wasn't that great just because they didn't like a bunch of his books. It's like, it is totally okay to be like, all right, well, you know, personally, I really didn't like this book, or I didn't really like that book of his, but that doesn't, you know, diminish his skill as an author, or the books that you did like, or the fact that, you know, he had such an effect on the genre. Like, that's it.
Yep, totally.
You know, and I remind myself of that sometimes, that it's like each you know, each time you write something, it's not, you know, we accept that everything we write isn't going to work for everybody.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But then it's kind of hard to stretch that over a career, say, you know, an entire body of work, and be like, that's also okay. It's not just that it doesn't work for everybody, it's that every one of your books doesn't work for everybody. So even your greatest fan might not like that series, you know, and like Robin Hobb has that, you know, like her how is it, the Soldiers, I can't remember. My brain is hurting me. She has a series that a lot of people really don't like, and it's just like and it's just like, oh, okay, it's not connected in, I think, with the Assassin's Apprentice ones. I think it's like a separate trilogy, but there's a lot of people who don't like it, and it has not at all taken away from her immense popularity. You know, it just is. And it's a really hard thing to accept, but it's just something I figure I may as well work on, you know, earlier in my career not, like that, you know, when people pick up my books, some people will prefer the Vengeance trilogy, some people will prefer the Reborn Empire, some people will really love the novella, some people will really love something else I do and really hate this, you know, and that's okay, and just to kind of let it be.
Yeah, I think that's just something we all have to try to internalize as much as possible, with each individual book. The case that I think of most often is, because it was the most obvious for me as a fan, reading the first. So I read R.A. Salvatore's. Have you ever read any of the Drizzt books, the Dark Elf series?
No, I haven't.
Okay. They're Forgotten Realms books, and they were very popular in the 90s, in particular in the early 2000s. And I started with like what was actually the fourth book that R.A. Salvatore wrote, and read that series and adored it, and then went back to the ones that chronologically take place first and also that he wrote first, and read those and purely stuck with them out of fandom because they were terrible. Right? And then there's like, from the one that I started with and onwards, there's like 21 books. Like he's written so much. He's a super prolific author, and I love a lot of his stuff. But some of his earlier stuff is really bad. Just like, I mean, not that that's an objective thing, right? But even just amongst his own body of work, right? Like comparing his ability to describe things well and not be clunky in his dialogue and his plot, like seriously, like just he got a lot better by the time he was on his fourth book or whatever. And that may even have been past that, because he wrote a whole separate series, but it was like the fourth Dark Elf. But anyway, but just like, you know, he got better as a writer, as he should, right? It would be really sad if his entire body of work were all at the same level. And one of the things I appreciated as I read more and more of his books as he kept publishing them was that he made changes, not just to his writing, but also to his ideologies and stuff, that made it really clear that he was working on himself as a human being and trying to be more inclusive and to overturn a lot of tropes that he'd embraced initially, because so many of us do, right? When we start with whatever our background is, the idea of orcs as cannon fodder being a prime example. The idea of any race being cannon fodder, right? Like like all absolutely evil people, like this group of sentient beings is just inherently bad, right? And that, in fact, like his Dark Elf series is entirely about that, because his whole point is like, here's this good Dark Elf that we follow the story of, but it starts off as being like, he's the only one. It's just a total fluke. And then it develops more, and even by the end of like the first three books just about that character, it becomes really clear that it's like, no, okay, it's just that this society has embraced these values and they're not great, and most people who disagree are just killed, right? You're just, because that's the way the society is set up. So you're like, okay, so that's why we don't see very many good Dark Elves, is because they don't make it out of the Underdark. And then it moves on. And then it moves on and on and on. And like later in the books, like after we've spent, you know, like 12 or 13 books just with the main character who were like, rah, go Drizzt, is like just destroys orcs on sight, like sees an orc and is just like instantly cutting it up. Very stabby, dual wielding, you would enjoy. But but these orcs are bad and I'm just gonna kill them. And then eventually, like, Salvatore finally realizes all the things that are wrong with that trope, and so he finally takes it and he twists it in the end, not the end, but in more and more as his series goes on, and it's so cool to see him do that. And it's sort of, I think, a really great example of an author improving as a writer and improving as a human being, and like doing their best within their own genre and he's writing in the Forgotten Realms, which means he's had to like stick to all these rules, because it's a Dungeons and Dragons game. Like you can't, like, you have to stick to this world. It's not your world. You can't, change it too much. So he has to stick it to those rules, but then he's doing the best he can in that framework to make a lot of really important points about social inequality and stuff that are like, it's impressive, because it's like he's stuck in this little box and he's like, okay, I'm going to take this box and I'm going to squish it really hard until it looks
whatever I can with this box.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, sorry. So that was a very long-winded way, but it's this really long series, and so you get this sense as you watch, like over the years of these books coming out, and then the bigger effort. And actually, I don't even know how much Salvatore's ideologies changed so much as how much he felt he could finally play with those pieces because he was a better known and better selling author. And that he could actually say, you know what, no, this is what I'm doing. They're like, no, you can't make orcs not eat automatically evil. I was like, guess what, I am. You know.
I'm always
So I don't know, like I'm not actually sure what the process was there, but seeing it happen for whatever reasons it did was really cool as a reader, and it's something that I'm like, okay, this is a good mental note as an author. When you know better, you do better, and that is true of like just your prose, like writing better, but also as a person, and like the making things more inclusive and doing a better job of avoiding stereotypes and all the things that we are capable of mishandling and misrepresenting and trying to do the best we can. And anyway, and so just like seeing that was a nice strong example of that. And like, yeah, you can't go back and fix those books that were already traditionally published, right? Like Salvatore can't go back and be like, oh, but we feel really bad about killing the orcs earlier that we killed. You can't do that. But instead he made this character's journey a coming of awareness of the fact that this wasn't actually okay. Anyway, sorry, that was very lengthy.
Which is just as powerful, really.
Yeah,
or probably more powerful, really, than changing it. You know, like it's like that idea of Disney remaking a lot of its originally kind of problematic content, and they're remaking it and just removing the content rather than acknowledging and addressing it in any fashion. It's like that. So if you went back and changed and just changed the books,
right,
you wouldn't actually be having the conversation about in what way this was wrong. We're just erasing the fact that we ever did that.
Right.
And it's like, it's more powerful to consider the way he's done it, and to actually sort of show a change of thinking, or to discuss it personally, as an author, the kind of realizations that he had or the decisions that he made around those things would have a lot more power.
Yeah. And I wonder too, like I've never actually, I don't know him personally, and I've never talked to him about it, but I do know, but like the thing that highlights it is because there's basically journal entries from his main character at various points throughout all the books, and he basically talks about all of that, like, and they're very personal. He sort of says, like, I'm now questioning I'm now questioning whether or not it's reasonable for me and my buddies to all just be like automatically killing these orcs, right? Like they seem to be this seems like maybe it wasn't anyway. So and he's been doing that, to be fair. He like that has been a part of that character's like core being from the start. That's how that character managed to decide to be a force of good even in the midst of a bunch of chaotic evil in D&D terms. Anyway, so it's neat. And yay for being able to fix things, but also yay for having a body of work that's representative of change. Okay, we are at the hour and 45-minute mark, and I basically have I was gonna ask what's next, but we know you're working on book 4 right now. Do you have anything else slated in your brain past that, or are you just book 4?
Yeah, no, I'm kind of working on multiple things at once. I'm a terrible person like that. So I have two adult fantasy series that I very slowly putting together pitches for after this. So they would be the next thing that I would talk to Orbit about, seeing if they want to continue publishing. So 2 different ones, just depending on which direction. Yes, all in the same world. So one would be not too far ahead, going to the Levante homeland.
Cool.
And another one would be going a bit further back in time to I don't know that it's mentioned in the first book. I can't remember where the first Otaku came from, across the sea in the ice ice islands, it's got dragons, it'll be awesome, but it's kind of a bit more back in time, so a little bit separated. So kind of just depends if we're going to continue the story kind of really very connectedly, or we're going to take a break and go back in time a bit forwards. I'm also working on a middle grade series. That, you know, I always wanted to write something that my children could read because they can't read about beheading.
You might want to put that off for a little while. I don't know how old they are.
I had never had any like ideas that excited me. It was always like, I should do this out of some kind of misplaced form of like parental guilt of like, I should write something for them because I like writing and I like my kids. So surely why aren't I writing for my kids? But you know, it's just, I never had an idea. It never interested me. It never kind of gripped me. So now that I really quite suddenly recently had this idea that I loved, and just got really like hyper keen on it, and have started working through that. So it's would be a middle grade series, a magical school that's entirely based around universal design for neurodivergent kids. So essentially, so my daughter has ASD, and you know, I kind of took the idea of you know, like how the things that I kind of love about Harry Potter being, you know, like found families, and that sense of sort of not being caught to your blood family and being able to make your own choices and that kind of stuff. But it's so, I mean, you know, quite apart from all the awful things that J.K. Rowling says these days, is so rigid in the way it structures things, which is exactly the problem with, you know, our current education system. You know, I have a niece who is kind of low functioning ASD, but she has that problem of being like, she has too high an IQ to go to, you know, a special needs school, but can't follow directions and understand what is required of her to go to a mainstream school. And so she just, you know, we call it here that we fall through the cracks. I don't know whether that's a saying that you have. You know, we talk about how kids fall through the cracks. And then I started thinking about, well, what is through the cracks? What is in there? What happens? Where are those kids going when they are falling through these cracks? And so I started thinking about this concept of this, you know, a school that is built on the idea of, like the self-determination of kids being able to decide their own things, like the lack of rigid, you know, because, you know, kids with ADHD, they can't focus in our schools, not because they're stupid. They can't focus in our schools because of the way the school is structured. So I wanted to work on that idea a bit. So I've been having a lot of fun with that.
Nice.
I'm also planning 2 or 3, maybe, Gothic, slightly more romantic time travel novellas that set in various parts of history. So that's been fun. So I can't not do things. I've got a problem.
Hardly a problem, but I mean, unless it's actually keeping you from completing projects, in which case then it's a problem. But it sounds like you're moving ahead on enough things that that's not actually a problem. It's just keeping yourself entertained.
Very busy.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I'm sure that anyone listening is excited about all those ideas. I know I am. My final question, obviously of great importance, is what movie do you most often quote with friends?
You know, it's funny because I think in terms of, I rewatch a lot of movies,
Nice.
and so my friends will often joke about, oh, you're just watching that again. You know, I think I've seen Interstellar like 200 times, and I'm not even exaggerating. I am just a real rewatcher for like mental health reasons as much as anything else. Like anything that kind of links to a calming thing for me, you know, I've rewatched many times, but they're not always very quotable. You know, I can't really think of any great quotes in Interstellar, and also not everybody else knows it. So, so ultimately, I just quote those to myself and feel like a bit silly. But I think the one that I quote the most to like as a friend group is just always going to be Lord of the Rings. You know, everybody does that. You know, the whole like my precious and you know, all of those kinds of moments that are just so quotable. Yeah, exactly. So quotable for your day-to-day experience, and everybody gets them.
Right.
That's got to be my most quoted series of movies for sure.
universal. I've only seen Interstellar like 3 times. So I don't have like, I can't pull that many quotes from it, but I do like, there are a couple exchanges with the robots that I feel like would be eminently cool.
Oh yeah.
But yeah.
Most people don't get them.
I would probably get them if I heard them, but I don't think I could come up with one on my own. But that's awesome. Interstellar's a good flick. And yeah, Lord of the Rings is obviously classic quoting. Well, it is now getting, well, whatever. I was going to say late for me. I'm usually up for another 2 hours, so it's not actually a problem. But again, trying to keep these somewhat on topic. If I hadn't gone off on a tangent about R.A. Salvatore for 10 minutes, we would be doing great. So sorry about that. But anyway, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk to me. I really appreciate it. This has been a lot of fun for me. I think like one of the main things I'm enjoying about COVID is just this excuse to talk to a bunch of fun author people that I really enjoy the work of. It's like, yay. So I really appreciate you taking the time. Thanks so much for joining us. Oh, I will check. Let's go check for questions right quick. So we do have Alicia was here for a little bit. Hello, Alicia.
Hi, Alicia.
Miss Dee 306, who comes to everything, was here for a while. Hey, Misty, thanks so much for coming. She had to run away at some point. I don't actually have timestamps on this. And Tony Johnson has been here. And I'm looking for, we have lots of nice comments, but I don't see any question marks. So we're going to call that good.
Everybody's questions.
Yeah, apparently we covered it. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you very much, Devin, for coming and talking. I am going to hit the end stream button. But one quick reminder to everybody, we now have, in addition to having this CorinCon logo on a bunch of merchandise, we now have a CorinCon Cube logo on face masks and so awesome reusable masks, more hoodies and stuff, and it's just the big Q with con in the middle and a the cube sign. So feel free to check that out. I tweeted it from the CorinCon account earlier. Yeah, so please check out merch. Every purchase goes to helping me pay the Zoom fee that comes along every month. And we're just providing free content for you to enjoy. So if you feel like rocking some merch and helping out with costs, that would be amazing. And again, thank you, Devin. Really appreciate it. I'm going to hit the end button. You'll still be here, but I'm going to end.